So we now turn to John Rawls, the philosopher John Rawls, in our summary of deontological approaches to normative theory construction, in particular with a focus on metanormative theory. John Rawls was a 20th century philosopher, moral and political philosopher who developed both a normative approach to theory construction, a unique one, grounded in Kant, and also a very influential, at least in philosophical circles, a very influential theory of justice. He is following in the tradition of Kant and Kant's categorical imperative procedure, in a sense. And in particular, he is reformulating and developing further the third formulation of Kant's categorical imperative. Act as if you were to test your principles or maxims by placing yourself as a legislator in a kingdom of ends or in a just society, and how would your principles be mutually agreed to and affirmed by free and equal persons? And that is the fundamental test upon which justifiability of one's principles would rest. And Rawls developed this in a very unique way in terms of what he called the original position. And the original position is a method of normative thought or normative inquiry, a method of normative justification, which is grounded in a collection of meta-normative criteria that are modeled in the idea of the original position, as we'll see. So Rawls's work is a form, and the original position is a form of what is referred to as constructivism, normative constructivism, or moral constructivism. And that is the idea that we will, in the process of justification, we will place acceptable restrictions on the reasons that individuals may appeal to in order to justify their principles. That is, and those are standards of normative constraint, and they constitute the meta-normative criteria of justification. So valid justification is constructed then through a procedure of deliberation that utilizes normative constraints that are presupposed as constitutive of valid moral thinking. In particular, for Rawls, they are constraints that reflect the freedom and equality of persons, as we'll see. This builds on the idea of a contract as the validity of the agreement, as the validity of any contract or agreement is contingent upon the conditions under which that agreement is reached. So when we enter into any kind of contract, the justifiability or the validity of the contract that we sign or agree to is contingent upon the conditions under which it was agreed to. If the conditions were not fair, or if the conditions were coercive, then the contract is not valid, can be dismissed or broken if it is agreed to under unjustifiable reasons, or conditions rather. So that's a a fundamental idea here that for Rawls, that we test our the justifiability of our principles under based upon the question, would they be agreed to mutually under certain normative conditions? And he'll describe those conditions as the conditions of fairness. So the original position models this procedure. It's a selection device that models rational agreement under fair conditions. It models acceptable restrictions on reasons that parties may appeal to in order to justify their principles. And it can be, and Rawls states this in A Theory of Justice, that the original position may be viewed then as a procedural interpretation of Kant's conception of autonomy and the categorical imperative. The principles regulative of the kingdom of ends are those that would be chosen in this position. That is the original position. And it's an analytic method for comparing and analyzing conceptions of justice, in particular the normative validity or justifiability of various principles of justice. So in the original position, parties and the original position is hypothetical. Representatives of people are placed in the original position, and they are charged with formulating and agreeing to principles of justice that would regulate their society, that would constitute the fair terms of social cooperation in their society. That's their charge, and they are representatives of people. And they're placed with that charge in a position hypothetically prior to the existence of the society. And they're presented with a short list of traditional conceptions of justice. And parties are required to agree to a particular conception among a list of alternatives. They are to choose. And certain formal conditions are imposed on them, and thereby the conceptions of justice or the principles of justice that they would agree to. Their conception must satisfy the formal constraints implied in the original position. And those are, in general, principles should be general. They shouldn't require a knowledge of contingent particulars. That is, they should be generally accessible to the population. They must hold for everyone. They're universal in that sense, everyone in the society. Principles must be public. They must form a public conception of justice. They must be able to order conflicting claims. They must be the final court of appeal, and they must be stable over time. That is, they should generate their own support. Those are formal constraints on what principles could be agreed to in the original position. Now, very important to the original position is Rawls's idea of the veil of ignorance. And the parties do not know their position in the society, in the future society. They're under a veil that prevents them from having certain knowledge that would, knowledge of where they might end up in that society. And that models rather the idea of impartiality. So the veil of ignorance is designed to have the parties be impartial, not influenced by their particular self-interest. And the parties to the original position would not know their place in society, their social class or social status in society. They could be very wealthy, they could be poor, they could be in the middle somewhere, they could be privileged in certain ways or not. They don't know what their abilities are either. They could be very smart or of average intelligence. They could suffer from cognitive disabilities, etc. So they don't know their level of ability. They don't know their talents either. They don't know what they're going to be good at or what they're not going to be good at. They also don't know what their particular conception of the good life. They don't know whether they'll have a certain disposition of optimism, etc., or pessimism. They won't know the particular circumstances of the society, and they don't know their place in history. They don't know which generation they'll be in. They might be in a future generation, for example, or in the present generation. So they don't know. The parties to the original position, under a veil of ignorance, do not know a lot about who they're going to be and their place in the society, and that's an attempt to model impartiality. They will know, the parties will know about general facts of society. They will know about the circumstances of justice. They'll know that they have a shared geographical space, that they're similar in capacity, that there's moderate scarcity, that they have roughly the same needs and interests, that they're rational, that they might suffer from the burdens of judgment. That is, they would acknowledge, they know that their reason is fallible, that they can make mistakes in their reasoning. So they know that, just general facts about society and circumstances, but they don't know any particulars about their position in that society. They also are rational. They know that they are rational and that they will pursue their own good, their own interests, even though they don't know their particular conception of the good. They know they will have some motivation to pursue a particular interest of theirs or a particular life plan. They know that they will have life plans, but they don't know exactly what those life plans would be. And there's an assumption that they would prefer more primary social goods than less, that they will need certain resources in order to fulfill their life plan. And they know enough to rank alternative principles and conceptions of justice. They will want to protect their liberties. They will want to have widened opportunity, and they will want to have access to the means for promoting their ends. They're not. They also know they're not envious. They don't suffer from envy as persons, and they have a sense of justice. That they will, once the principles of justice are agreed to, that they will abide by them, they will act consistently with them. And they'll operate under what Rawls called the maxim-min rule. It is rational to rank alternatives by their worst possible outcome. And to reject outcome is rational to reject outcomes that one cannot accept. And the minimum, they will seek a minimum guarantee or assurance that a minimum will be guaranteed, that they would not readily jeopardize in order for the sake of greater advantages. That is, the members or the parties to the original position are not high-stake gamblers. They wouldn't. They would find it irrational or not rational to roll the dice, so to speak, and say, "Well, let's weight all the. Let's distribute the. Let's have principles that distribute the most to those with the greatest talent," for example. Not knowing where they are, what their talents would be, they wouldn't take that risk. It might work out, but it could jeopardize a lot. So in other words, they're not risk takers, and they would therefore seek to have principles that would benefit the least advantaged persons in the society, not knowing who they are and not knowing where they will be. So so they're operating under that rule, the maximum rule, which is a constraint, which is a manifestation of their rationality, not to be risk takers. And also, they all recognize that there's a social basis of self-respect, and that self-respect is of primary importance to all persons in the society, and that the principles that they select should be the basis of should constitute the social basis of self-respect and mutual respect in the society. So they know they would want to live in a society that where they would experience self-respect, and their self-respect would not be damaged or undermined by social circumstances. So this construction, the original position, provides a deductive basis for principles that account for our considered judgments. They're intended to set out the necessary premises to achieve a set of justifiable principles. So the original position is modeling certain criteria. The original position is loaded, if you will, uploaded or front-loaded with a range of normative criteria, in particular the criteria of fairness, the elements of fairness. Each of the parties are equal, so it models equality. They have equal power in the original position. They are impartial under the veil of ignorance, and they comport with reciprocity. They wouldn't claim for themselves what they would deny others. And in that case, in that sense, the conditions under which they are to agree to a set of principles are fair. And justification of a principle, therefore, from this perspective, from this methodology, suggests that what we agree to under fair conditions is what is justifiable. Is what is justifiable. And that's Rawls's basic deontological approach or methodology for normative justification. So the normative criteria here are the elements of fairness, and we would judge or test our principles of justice based upon their consistency with fairness. And therefore Rawls himself called his approach justice as fairness. So the principles of justice, the justifiability of the principles of justice are contingent upon them being consistent with fairness. And fairness is derived, the criteria of fairness are derived from a conception of the person as free and equal. So Rawls assumes from the outset that we're going to begin with a conception of the person, a model of the person as a free and equal person. That we're going to assume as a starting point that that we should recognize each other as free and as equal. And then, based upon that conception of the person, he derives the constraints or the conditions under which our agreement about principles would be justifiable. So the test then becomes what would free and equal persons mutually agree to and affirm? What principles of justice would free and equal persons agree to and affirm under conditions that modeled or represented their freedom and equality? And he argues that those conditions would be the conditions of fairness. That what models our freedom and equality is fairness.